And also for the sake of the two people who just joined us, I'm Mazen Kumsiya, Palestinian Christian from this area of Bethlehem. I was born in this area and I am here. I did my education in the US, and we were talking about the status, the situation here. And soon we will be talking about international solidarity. So anyway, Bethlehem has lost basically a lot of land to the Israeli colonization. And you can see here the bluish areas are Israeli colonies. And the Bethlehem area has been restricted basically to a very small area, part of what the ancient or the more recent district of Bethlehem borders. It's been shrinking. The colonizers, of course, do also all sorts of other activities, including like draining wetlands like they did in the Hula area, diverting water of the Jordan Valley, changing the water courses in the systems here. So they now want to transfer water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea and desalinate it, dump the sludge basically into the Dead Sea. Water issues are a big issue here, not because we have shortage of water, but because we have unequal distribution. So basically, Palestinians get very little water, whereas Israelis get a lot more water. The Gaza Strip is even worse in terms of the situation. They hardly have any drinkable water. And according to the UN, Gaza is already unlivable, 2 million people under blockade and siege. And these people don't even have access to fish in the Mediterranean more than the 6 mile allowed to them, or 3 miles sometimes, most of the time. So there's actually literally starvation and people dying because of medical conditions that could be easily treated, that they are not treated because of the blockade by Israel on Gaza. Where we are, basically, bottom line, I don't want to spend too much time on diagnosis if you want, but where we are is basically we Palestinians who used to own all this land, Palestinian Christians, Muslims, and there were, as I mentioned, 3% native Jewish population. These Palestinians ended up in the enclaves that you see on the map on the left, which are like ghettos in the Galilee, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in the Negev, and in Gaza. And altogether, these islands represent about 8.3% of the historic land of Palestine. This is similar to South Africa under apartheid, where the blacks were relegated by the colonizers to about 11.5% of the land of South Africa under apartheid. So we're talking actually worse than apartheid in South Africa in terms of land allocation. And yet this continues to shrink, of course, and the idea is to make sure that Palestinians disappear, so to speak. And this shrinking map of Palestine was drawn by my son first in 1998 when he was in school in the United States, after he saw the shrinking map of the United States where the Native Americans were relegated to these reservations, which you see by 1890 where they were. This is what they call settler colonialism, which is a diagnosis. It has many, many symptoms. I don't want to spend too much time on the symptoms, but settler colonialism, whether in North America, South America, Australia, Africa, anywhere else in Southeast Asia, India was also colonized by the British at one point, etc. Has the same features, basically, imperialism, colonialism. And you are very familiar with it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It has one of three possible outcomes. Either the Algerian model, where 1.5 million natives were killed, some people say up to 3 million, and 1 million French left Algeria. Some were six generations French who've never seen or visited France. That's one model. The other model is Australia and the US, where it's genocide of natives. And the third model is the rest of the world model, which is one country for descendants of colonists and colonized. I think the most likely scenario is scenario 3, because just on a probability basis, it's found around the world. And so that's very likely to happen here. Also because Palestine rejects the other models and rejects the idea of apartheid or any other kind of scenario. We, the native people around the world, continue to struggle for our rights. And I believe that the struggle is painful, but is necessary. We have paid a heavy price since 1948 for this. Over 100,000 of us have been killed, over 800,000 have been injured, and about 1 million have been detained or imprisoned. Now, I'm going to switch gears here and talk for 4 or 5 minutes about solidarity and international struggle. I like this picture. It's from two friends of mine, Ghada Karmi and Alan Siegel, one Palestinian, one Jewish American. And as you see, they're carrying signs and they're demonstrating from the early 1970s until today, actually. They're still, they work jointly. This is what I call joint struggle. I am in favor of the terminology of joint struggle rather than the terminology of solidarity or humanitarian aid or something like that. I tell you a story that I was invited to speak in Mumbai one time a few years ago. And that was, to me, the height of crystallizing my mind around this concept of international solidarity, because the struggles in India, whether it's like for the poor people or the low, as they used to call them, lower caste people and things like that, are basically similar, because the elites in this world, be it people like Netanyahu or Modi or others who are rich and very powerful, they don't necessarily pay attention to the suffering of millions of people. And we need, as a people, to join hands, because basically our enemy is the same. What is our enemy? Our enemy, I think, is greed. And I need to emphasize that we can work together against this, and we can join hands. And Zohar will talk more a bit about these things. But I did want to show you this picture because it's illustrative of what Palestine was and what Palestine should be. This is 1932, where secular and religious leaders in Palestine got together to object to Zionism and to insist that Palestine should not be a Jewish state, just like Mahatma Gandhi said, that Palestine should be for its people, the people here. And who are the people here? It could be Christians like my family, or Muslims, or Jews also, or Baha'i, or Druze, or anybody else. And you can see in this picture, that's how it was. Palestine was always diverse. Palestine was always its strength. There is strength in diversity, whether in nature or in society. Diversity is strength. So we insist on returning to this diversity and dismantling basically the racism of apartheid. This is me being arrested a few times. We started this institute that Zohar is volunteering at, called the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, to basically promote natural and human communities, and create sustainability. We consider this a form of resistance also. Our motto is respect, respect for ourselves, respect for other human beings, and respect for nature. And basically, we work on things like the impact of Israeli settlements, whether residential settlements like this one, which is the hill just across the valley here, that used to be forested, as you see up there in 1997, and what it looked like after development of an Israeli Jewish-only colony built on Palestinian land. We work with children a lot. We have a museum of natural history. We try to educate people about this respect, and we take them to the field, as you see here. We work in partnership and joint solidarity with lots of groups, lots in the world, and we even got funded by many groups, including National Geographic Society. We work on things like climate change and recycling, and we have aquaponics and aquaculture, grow fish and vegetables. We have many interesting projects related to these things. We work with farmers, for example, 80 farmers in Makhrur Valley, to promote permaculture and things like that. So what I'm telling you now basically is what I call the therapy. Some people say, well, this is not going to get to the core of the problem, that we have much more problems, but I disagree. I think humans can do a lot within their own spheres, even poor things. I mean, I was just reading last week a story about a guy in Ethiopia who helped make his area all green, just planting a few trees every day over, 30 years or something. So I think, with persistence, with resilience, one can do a lot for their communities, and this is what we aim at. We do have a global impact, and we started working with people around the world, and hopefully we can also collaborate with India on some of these things like food sovereignty. I don't like to use the term food security. I think we, the people, whether in India or Palestine, need to have control over our food production, not have Monsanto or some other companies running our lives. So food sovereignty in areas of how we sustain ourselves as human beings, we try to do a lot. This is what the museum will look like, by the way, in a couple of years. If you come back here, come to visit it. I will just summarize by saying, since I'm in the medical field, that if you focus on a lot of the symptoms of what's going on here, yes, life here is very tough. There are walls that prevent me even from getting to Jerusalem, which is only about 5 kilometers away. I used to be a high school teacher in Jerusalem. I'm not allowed to enter Jerusalem, my city, basically. There are all sorts of restrictions. They take our water, our land, our natural resources. They control our lives in every aspect. This is what I call the symptoms of the underlying etiology of, like in cancer, you have many symptoms, but there's an etiology. What is the etiology? Is cancer, which you have to cure. So once you make the right diagnosis, which in this case is settler colonialism, you can think of solutions, like I said, post-colonial situations where you have coexistence, equality, justice, human rights. The prognosis, the likelihood of that happening is very high, because Palestine has always been multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, and it will go back to that, in my humble opinion. And that's a prognosis. And the therapy to accelerate this prognosis is for us to work together, which is resistance in all its forms. And a big form of this is the joint solidarity or joint struggle, which I prefer over solidarity. Joint struggle, like with people in India, with people in the US, with anywhere in the world, that's joint struggle. So basically, this is what I have to say, and I'll go back to the quote of Mahatma Gandhi because I like it, and I would just change a little bit. Mahatma Gandhi probably was not very familiar with what was present here and what is going on. And we follow some of his teachings, of course. I have a whole library of books at home about Mahatma Gandhi and the work of Mahatma Gandhi. I think, he wrote to the leaders of the Zionists, he wrote to the British. He was very active in these aspects of global international solidarity, joint struggle. And I think other people who followed his footsteps, like Martin Luther King, had similar things. When Martin Luther King, for example, was told, why do you have to worry about wars and conflict and economic injustice, all of this? Why don't you just stick with civil rights? That's all you need to worry about. And Martin Luther King said to them, no, I would be a hypocrite if I do that, because we have to work. I cannot defend a black man in America if I'm not also defending the rights of a Vietnamese who's being bombed by my government. So I think, the joint struggle to me is precisely that. And it is a big part of the therapy, as I call it, for the illness that afflicts all of us, all humans, not just Palestinians or Indians or particular areas. And the way the world has become interconnected, despite now the coronavirus that's ravaging us and you and everybody else and separating us, really, actually, the coronavirus actually showed us how interconnected this world is. And we can no longer bury our heads in the sand and claim, quote unquote, national interests, or I'm only America first, as Donald Trump would say. No, I'm sorry, you cannot do that anymore. If it was possible 150 years ago, certainly it's not possible now with climate change, pandemics, risk of nuclear war, and other things that are risking our lives. I will stop here and let Zohar give her thoughts, and then we can take questions and answers and comments.
Okay, I think Ashok asked me to tell a little bit of my story, so I'll try and do that. I was born on a kibbutz near Nazareth in the Galilee, and as I tried to explain also in the email to Ashok, I was fortunate to be born into a family that didn't adhere to the like mainstream Zionist discourse. Of course, there were different things, but my father, for example, who served in the Israeli army and was a soldier in 1967 when the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights were, the Sinai, of course, also were occupied by Israel. He came back home and he said, we shouldn't be keeping these territories, So he was against the occupation from the start. But it was actually my mother, who was a school teacher, who, when I was about 5, was on a bus going to school and saw a house being demolished in Nazareth, which is very close to the kibbutz. And she came back home and she said, this is terrible. These people are left without a roof over their heads. And I remember as a young girl going and visiting this Palestinian family and playing with their children among the rubble of their house. And of course, other people from our community were totally for. They were actually the ones to ask for this house to be demolished. And I think this marked me in a way, to understand that these people are human, just like us. They need the same things. So how can we be doing this to them? I think this is sort of my explanation of how I began this path of, going away from the mainstream Zionist Israeli society. And I lived in Spain, as was explained before, for 14 years, because I thought that what was needed was pressure from the outside on Israel to comply with international law and respect human rights to begin with. But also, whenever I spoke to people in Spain and elsewhere, I was trying to explain how, the solidarity or the joint struggle with the Palestinian people is not something we do for others. It's something we do for ourselves. Because if we want to live on this planet, we have to work together. And we can learn from the Palestinian struggle just as much for our own situation wherever we are. So I think this is basically what we're trying to do. And of course, we're facing, as humanity, we're facing a lot of challenges. The coronavirus is one of the minor things, and I think it's out of our control. There are a lot of things that we do to this planet and to each other that are totally under our control, and these are the things we should be focusing on. I think this is about everything I have to say right now, so I'll pass it on to you.
I mean, I would love to
Hello.
hear more from everybody. And, as you heard, we can discuss many things, but I think it's nice if you address your questions to Zohar about specific areas that she can address, like the role of international solidarity. I would love for you to hear about her experience on the boats to Gaza, for example.
Yeah,
Maybe Zohar, you wanna say
I was
something?
about to ask that about her, flotilla activities. Can you tell something about that? And
Sure, I can explain that Gaza, like the other occupied territories, has been under restrictions of movement for a long time. But since 2007, Israel has really blockaded this small strip of land, as Mazen explained before. It's blockaded by land, air, and sea. And some international people started already back in 2006 thinking about, a way to reach out to the people besieged in that strip of land in Gaza. And in 2008, they managed to sail, and actually they had 5 missions that managed to break this blockade and enter Gaza. These were small boats, and they brought a few international activists, and they were able to take some people from Gaza out to reunite with their families or to get medical treatment. And by the end of that year, 2008, of course, Israel launched this brutal military attack called Cast Lead, and boats that tried to come in later in those dates were stopped, always stopped by the Israeli Navy. There was no boat allowed since then. In 2010, the first large-scale flotilla was organized, and 6 boats sailed from Turkey, or some sailed from Turkey, then others joined from Cyprus. And on the night of the May 31st, they were attacked by the Israeli Navy, And because one of the boats, the Mavi Marmara, was a big vessel with hundreds of activists on board, it was attacked from the air by helicopters, and as soldiers came down onto the deck, they started shooting people, and they met some resistance from the people on deck, and they, shot some of them dead immediately. They injured a lot of them, and this brought to world's attention the fact that Israel is not only repressing the Palestinians, but it's attempting to break all attempts of solidarity. And we've gone on trying to break this blockade. In 2011, there were 12 vessels organizing in Greece, and they were all blocked by the Greek government under pressure from the US and Israel. Later on, there were, other boats. In 2012, the Estelle, the sailing vessel, sailed from Scandinavia, stopping in many ports in Europe before it was again caught in international water, taken to Israel against the will of the people on board. And then the Israeli activists, or Israeli and international activists on board the Estelle, were all accused of entering Israel illegally. And then the internationals deported, the Israelis put under house arrest for a short while. We've gone on having many missions over the years, and I think it was mentioned that in 2016, the mission was focused on women, and we tried to highlight the role of Palestinian women in the struggle of their people. And of course, there's talk about feminism and the fact that Palestinian women also have to struggle against patriarchy in their own society, but this is all within the context of occupation. And it's very important to understand that through the struggle against the Israeli occupation, women have been able to assert and become a more prominent part of their own society. We had different women from all countries of the world on that little sailing boat called the Zaytuna Oliva, and this boat was also taken by the Israelis. And I myself was only on the boat in 2018, and we were sailing as the people in Gaza were taking part in a massive non-violent struggle called the Great March of Return, demanding their right to return to their historical homes in Palestine. Our boat, the boat we were on, and Mazen joined us for a short while from Naples to Sicily, was called Al Auda, the Return. And this boat, again, was stopped by the Israelis in international water. We were taken to the port of Ashdod, and international activists were deported. I don't know if you need to know anything of our future plans. Of course, we meant to sail in this year, 2020, and also to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the the attack on the first flotilla, but we were prevented from doing this by the COVID pandemic. And then we still plan to sail, and our next mission will be focused on children and young people. I think Vivek has a question.
Vivek, you have a question?
I mean, I see also there's some chat rooms. If you want, you can put your question also in the chat room, or comment.
I would like to ask you a question. What are your plans for building international solidarity? within, of course, including Israeli Jews or Jews outside, because you can see a number of groups emerging, especially in US, who are talking about Palestine. Those who are believing in human rights. And there may be some joint ventures by Israelis and Palestinians together outside of Israel-Palestine.
I mean,
Are there any?
yeah, I think that the international solidarity movement as a whole, the joint struggle activities, the programs, the entities that are being created in many cities are literally in the perhaps thousands, if not tens of thousands, of groups that are engaged, whether here in India and any country on earth. There are groups, you can Google any country, put Palestine Solidarity or Palestine with the name of the city, let's say in Mumbai, and you will get some people who are interested, who are working. And I think, it's a really good feeling that there is a global movement, similar to the global movement that happened against apartheid in South Africa. Yet, of course, our challenges are much more compounded than the challenges of that was faced by the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, partly because of the strength of the media and the lobbies and the governments that are supporting Israel for one reason or another. It's very hard. But my own judgment is that eventually, who was it who said this? I don't remember if it was Martin Luther King or somebody said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that's what will happen. Eventually, it may take longer, but eventually it bends towards justice. What's your job and mine is to bend it a little more, tug on it a little bit. That's how I see it. And I don't know, Zohar wants to add more to this.
Well, I can say on a practical level, since this is a workshop, that just about the structure of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, that it's, as the name implies, it's a coalition. It's not an organization, and it's a coalition made up by campaigns in different countries, and some of the campaigns are not country-based. And we would like to encourage people in India to actually form a campaign and support our work. And I think it's very important to find practical ways, tangible things that, direct action has this capacity to mobilize people. And I think this is very important. I think Apruva has raised his hand or her hand, I don't know.
Yeah, those who raise their hand, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have a question for Mr. Mazin.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
You were saying something about Mahatma Gandhi's statement, and you were saying that there is something that you would like to add over there. Will you please add there?
No, what I said is that, Mahatma Gandhi, like Martin Luther King, believed in justice, believed in human rights. And when he was asked about Palestine, he was approached actually by Zionists. He advised them not to go and take somebody else's land just because Europeans were discriminating against them. He said, well, Europeans were obviously discriminating against Indians also, and what we need to do is struggle against this. So he was like many of these, Edwin Douglas, Mahatma Gandhi, Malcolm X, all these people. They suggested that the way to fight against injustice, well, is to fight against injustice. It is not to go and do injustice to somebody else. This is the logic that Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and many others taught us, and that's why I say we in Palestine respect these ideas a lot. It is not, for example, for me as a Palestinian being discriminated against by the Israelis, the occupiers, the colonizers. I cannot go to Yemen and create a country for Palestine in Yemen and discriminate against Yemeni people. That would not be a logical thing. So it is what it is, philosophically, logically, is how to approach these things. And I think it can be done and it will be done. So I really believe in this joint struggle for human rights. Look, the other reason why it is important for all our people to join hands, whether Indians, Americans, Israelis, whoever. The reason we joined hands, for example, in South Africa against racism in South Africa, is precisely what Martin Luther King wrote when he was in Birmingham jail. He said it's hypocritical for us to just defend certain types of people. When we are against racism, we cannot say, well, I am against racism only if it affects my own, so to speak. Whatever that own is, if a Muslim says, well, I'll defend Muslims only if they are Muslims, I don't defend human beings who are being discriminated, we say that's hypocritical. Or if a Jew or a Christian, you cannot do that, It's human beings that are suffering. And so as a result, we have to fight for fellow human beings, no matter who they are, no matter who they are. This is the key point for the idea of joint struggle and why it is really hypocritical to focus only on one community or only on one struggle. South Africa was important actually to point out the hypocrisy of Western governments, which were always speaking about human rights and international law, but they were supporting apartheid in South Africa. Every single Western government supported apartheid. All the European countries, America, Canada, all of the US, everybody, Australia, they supported apartheid. Of course, after the apartheid lost and disappeared, at least in terms of having one person, one vote, there is still economic apartheid in South Africa. But after it stopped, they all said, but we've always supported freedom for South Africa. They're hypocritical. And South Africa was like the Achilles heel that shows this Western imperialist hypocrisy. And I think Palestine, in a similar way, shows the hypocrisy of Western governments, be it American, Canadian, Australian, French, British, all of them. And of course, now we have Arab countries, I hate to say this, that are just as much hypocritical. They say we support Palestinian rights, but then they basically make deals and shake the hands of bloody murderers, genocidal murderers.
One more question. On Netflix, there is a Fauda. It's a web series. How far that web series is realistic?
Not very realistic, and certainly has an agenda, but I wouldn't, these things you have. I think the best way to really see reality, of course, bar none, is for you to come and visit us. Meet with Israelis, meet with Palestinians, see things on the ground for yourself. That is the best way. The second best way is to read books that are written by objective people, objective historians, be it Israeli historians or Palestinian historians, Israeli historians like Ilan Pape or others, Avi Shleim, etc., or Palestinian historians like Noor Masalha and Salman Abu Sitta and others. This is the two best ways I would recommend for getting information, not to take it from sensationalist TV shows or movies.
I think we would really like to hear from the people who raised their hands. So if you could please
Yeah,
unmute and speak.
Unmute. Apurva. Apurva, are
Hi,
you there? Gautam?
I am. Yeah, hi. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat box also, but maybe Ashok can direct you to them in some time. Thanks a lot for your talk, and it's really nice to hear both of you. I've heard a lot about both of you, but this is the first chance that I'm getting to hear. I'm part of BDS, so I've of course visited Palestine, and it's a great pleasure to hear from you about this. And I'm really keen on hearing more about, on the one hand, the question of because I think we're talking about apartheid, and I of course relate to it very much, and I think we should really follow that position and that principle, because it's also something that came to be understood as a part of international law. So there's a lot of gravity in saying what is apartheid. So and also at the same time, the part that you said earlier about how this is not, we cannot see it as you're extending this to somebody else, but that this is an idea of joint struggle, because India, if you might know, last year the Indian government passed a law which is pretty similar to an apartheid like situation for minorities here. So when we reach that point, we would also seek international support. So there is a lot of value in building and thinking internationally, which I think today's world restricts us from doing. um, but I think there's also something very definitive about apartheid, and it would be great if you could talk about that systematic nature of Israeli racism, and why that principle applies here, because it makes such a strong case, and I think that's one way to really raise international awareness on this. And also, thanks a lot for talking about the Freedom Flotilla, and would also be great if you could talk about some other initiatives for international solidarity, which I think people in a lot of places can join. Of course, there are groups that exist everywhere, as you said, Mazen. And, I think if people understand the kind of work efforts, even small ones, that can really contribute to that work, it would make a great difference. So, and thanks a lot. It was great listening to you.
Go ahead.
Okay, to speak about the systematic nature of discrimination against the native people of Palestine is to speak about even before the State of Israel, the British mandate started, helping the Jewish immigration by removing people from their land. And then, of course, once the State of Israel was established, it passed laws. The Palestinians who actually stayed on their lands within the Green Line lived under military rule for 19 years until 1966. This was clearly a way to remove them from their lands, to confiscate their lands, to confine them to their villages. They were subject to a regime of permits, in order to leave their village, to do certain things. Everything had to be approved by the military commander. And there are still a lot of laws in Israel that discriminate against Palestinian citizens of Israel. And of course, since 1967, this has been extended to the newly acquired territories, with the difference that these people never got citizenship. Apart from East Jerusalem, which was annexed to Israel, and the people there got permanent residency, which is another way of keeping them under control, because they have something to lose. I think this is the game that Israel plays with the Palestinians by dividing them into different categories and different areas, I would say there are different types of hell. There's the hell of Hebron, there's the hell of Gaza, there's the hell of East Jerusalem, there's the hell of the Jordan Valley, the South Hebron Hills. All these places have their own difficulties, and by forcing the Palestinian population to struggle for their survival and to focus on their own particular problems, they prevent them from uniting and struggling together. I don't know if this answers the question about the systematic nature of this.
I want to just add, because Apurva says something about apartheid being important as a category, as a label. There's actually an international convention called the International Convention Against the Crime of Apartheid and Racial Discrimination. And if you read that convention, which considered such practices as being a crime against humanity, if you read that convention, which is signed onto by countries like India and Palestine and even the US, Israel fulfills all the criteria for being an apartheid state. This is not some Palestinian saying this. It's just you can go read the convention for yourself and look at these laws that Zohar mentioned. For example, there are 65 laws that discriminate against non-Jews within the Jewish state of Israel. This is excluding even the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who are not considered non-Jews in a Jewish state. They are considered basically trespassing on Jewish land, and they have nothing. So basically, the 65 laws are against even Israelis who carry Israeli passports who are not Jewish. 65 laws. They are listed actually in a website called Adala. I can write it in the chat area if you want. You can look it up. But anyways, and against us, Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, there are hundreds of other laws, which are called military orders. Like the military order that says, I, as a Palestinian Christian, cannot go to Jerusalem because I'm not Jewish. It's as simple as that. It's really an order to bar us, because right next to my house, there are settlements with Jews living in them who are not subject to these laws. This is what apartheid is. When you have two sets of communities living in the same territory, but there's two sets of laws that apply to them, one to the dominant community and one to the other community. This is what apartheid was in South Africa. So it is clearly important to do this. To really call things by their right name. Vishwas, Kali.
Yeah, but there are a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if we should address these first.
Okay,
I'll try to do it
see.
briefly.
There was a question about Zionism being conflated with anti-Semitism. You want to take that? So
Sure. I mean,
yeah, you can take up that. Yes.
I think, again, there's a lot of information and there are people who know much more about this than me, but it is clearly, trying to portray Israel as if it represents Jews all over the world is detrimental to Jews who actually live elsewhere. And it's also detrimental to Jews who live in Israel, because when you block all types of criticism against the occupation and against violations of human rights, you actually make life worse for Israeli Jews, and you encourage anti-Semitism. So I think it's a tactic by the Israeli propaganda to try to avoid criticism. This is all it is. And I don't know if we need to go into the fact that, this definition that I think Mazen doesn't even agree with about Semitism, the Semite languages or the Semite region is actually not just about Jews. So if you talk about anti-Semitism, it should be against all these people, and then of course it loses the meaning that Zionists try to give it. I don't know again if this answers, or if you want to add something to it.
I would only add that that in South Africa the same language was used. That if you're against apartheid, it means you're anti-white. And of course, it was not true, because there were many whites who are opposed to apartheid. There were many blacks who supported apartheid also. So we need to understand this. I mean, there are Arabs who support Zionism. There are Christians who support Zionism. Sorry to say about my own religion. There are Christians who mistakenly support Zionism because they think it's somehow fulfillment of prophecies in the Old Testament and all of this stuff. And then it is complete misreading of the Bible. So I really think people need to be aware of these issues and need to understand them. And and the final thing I would say is it's really, really dangerous that Israel tries to portray this as a religious conflict, that this is somehow between Jews and Muslims. You know, it's horrible if you do that, you know, and it's horrible for everybody, not just for the victims, the Palestinian victims who happen to be Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, and Druze, and everything else. If you portray it as a religious conflict, sorry, but religious conflicts, you know, are not very pretty, as you guys know. In India, when you do try to use religion for conflict about certain things, people are killed, suffer, and this is not a good thing. We need to keep things in the rightful context. What we have here is a political conflict that started in the late 19th century with an idea, a simple idea that said, you know, because Jews are discriminated against in Europe, they should have their own state, and that state must be Palestine. Well, you know, it sounds good in theory, but, you know, Palestine was not a land without a people for a people without a land. There were people here. What are you going to do with those people? This is the key question you have to ask yourself, whether as a Jewish or a Christian or a Muslim or any other religion who wants to support Zionism or wants to think about Zionism. What are you going to do with millions and millions of Palestinian natives who have lived here for thousands of years? You know, that is the crux of the problem. And to convert it to say that anybody who criticizes colonialism is somehow anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, or whatever term we use, is really a poor kind of a crutch that is really not helpful to anybody. Not helpful to Jews either, as Zohar articulated well.
Yeah, I think there's another question. Sorry, Ashok. There's another question in the chat about my personal experience and, you know, how growing up in a Zionist culture, I was treated by my family and friends for my views or whatever. So actually, on my journey to, you know, a deeper understanding of the, you know, the problem here and the lies that we were taught as growing up within the educational system of the Israeli state, I think I did alienate myself from a lot of my friends. Fortunately, not so much my family. I think I actually eroded a little bit their visions. So I've been able to like open their eyes, but I was never, you know, I never suffered any like personal cost from this precisely. And I think, yeah, it was Vishwas and then Ashok who raised their hands.
Related to your question, may I ask you one more question? How do you distinguish between Judaism and Zionism? Because that has something to do with the fate of Indians. That is, we also distinguish between what is known as Hinduism and Hindutva. These are two different things. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think Mazen and I differ a little bit. Shall I go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So for me, the Jewish identity has more than the religion. You know, I'm not religious. I didn't grow up in a religious home, but I was somehow brought up within that context that makes Judaism part of my identity. And Zionism, particularly, is just an ideology that arises in the mid 19th century as one of the reactions to persecution against the Jews, and it had different currents. And what was common to all of them was the need to revive somehow, to shake, I would say, the Jews of the diaspora from their ways of, somehow supporting or just keeping their heads down when they were persecuted. So it was this idea. And of course, the current that decided that the solution for this was to create a sovereign state only for Jews, as if there were like a national cause, is a mistake. But even if, I like to say that Zionism, along its path, could have chosen different directions, like on different crossroads. If they decided, okay, so we need a sovereign state, and they started a state, but once the state was created, all people who lived in that state had the same civil and human rights, it wouldn't have been so bad. Of course, the problem is that from there it went even worse. So I don't know if that answers.
If I may just, so the question is, what's the difference between Judaism and Zionism? Judaism is a religion like any other religions, in my humble opinion. There are also strands of the Jewish religion. There's conservative Judaism, there's Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism. Just like in Islam, you have Shia and Sunni and Salafi, etc. Or in other religions, Christianity, for example, you have Protestant, you have Orthodox. These are religions. These are different core beliefs that people follow to be close to their God in their own way and in their own interpretation of their religious texts. And I have no quarrels with religions. Anybody has the right to believe whatever they want to about particular religious beliefs. And I respect all religions. And I even, here in this museum, I have Muslims, Christians, others, as you see, and they all happily live together. And when I see one of the Muslims here, for example, didn't go on prayer, I tell him, you forgot your prayer, go to do your prayer, even though I'm not a Muslim. So I have respect for all these religions. Zionism is an ideology, basically, and there are also brands of Zionism. In the early days, there were like cultural Zionists, religious Zionists, etc. But then there is also political Zionists. Cultural Zionists, for example, or religious Zionists, propose that they come back to the land here, so-called come back, as people who practice Judaism. Some of them believe that the connection to this land is very important and they need to come here. And we Palestinians, of course, welcome that. We welcome that, if you want to call it, brand of Zionism, which has to do with simply coming to live here in peace with equality. We Palestinians have always welcomed immigrants of all types. After Russian pogroms, for example, many Jews came to Palestine in the 19th century, and they were welcomed. We never had any problems with that. After the Armenian Holocaust and during the Armenian Holocaust and even before the Armenian Holocaust, many Armenians came to Palestine, and we even have a quarter of the old city of Jerusalem is called the Armenian Quarter because that's where those people live. Once they are here, they are considered natives. They learn the Arabic language, they learn the culture of the country, and they get integrated in our society. We have no problem. So we have no problem with cultural Zionism, religious Zionism, those kinds of Zionism, if you want to call them Zionism. But those were minority movements that kind of actually were destroyed by political Zionists. Political Zionists had the idea of a Jewish state, period, end of story. Not a Palestinian state that has Jews in it, or a secular democratic state that respects the rights of all religions. No, Zionists have a very clear idea that the state should be by the Jews, for the Jews, run by Jews, and that everybody else should be either kicked out, or if they accidentally remain, or if they remain against all odds, we ought to do everything in our power to reduce their presence, marginalize them, push them out, as Zohar had mentioned. So this is the core problem that we face is with political Zionism, and political Zionism is a movement that I am very, very much against. And, I consider a racist movement that is not remediable. I mean, unless they go back to cultural or religious Zionism. But that's how I feel about Zionism. Zionism is very, very different than Judaism. There are even very religious Jews, like the Orthodox Jews of the Neturei Karta and others, who are very anti-Zionist, even more than I am, very vicious anti-Zionist, because they think having a Jewish state is like trespassing on God, and what God wanted and all of this stuff.
What do you have to say about groups like Neturei Karta, who are Orthodox Jews, but they hate the concept of Zionism?
That's what I just said. The Neturei Karta are Orthodox Jews who are anti-Zionist. They even burn the Israeli flags, and they do all sorts of things against the presence of a Jewish state here. And they say Palestine should be run by the Palestinians, that only after the Messiah comes, then we can have, Jews being recognized, being special, whatever. That this has to await the Messiah, which is what's in the Old Testament anyway. That's what is described in the Old Testament. So there are some groups called also guardians of the Torah, basically because they respect the Torah, not the misinterpretations of the Torah that is done by religious Zionists, religious political Zionists, I should say.
And I would like to say that I think, especially in the U.S., you can see this with Jewish Voice for Peace and other groups that are growing, and a lot of young people. They cite the fact that their Jewish upbringing was based on universal values, and it doesn't really matter whether these values come from Judaism or not. The fact is, they were brought up thinking that this was what was good about their identity, and these things are violated by the state of Israel on a daily basis. So their criticism of the state of Israel is based on their Jewish upbringing.
What do you have to say about certain groups like If Not Now, who had protested against APAC, yeah. So they had a large protest against, APAC. What do you have to say about these groups?
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I was saying. This is one of the examples of groups of young Jews in the United States or elsewhere who say, it's out of my Jewish identity that I oppose what the Israeli state is doing.
I may add that political movements are known for using religions. And I'm glad you mentioned Hindustan those attempts to use religions, whether it's Islamism or Zionism or Crusaderism, for example. When the Crusaders came here to Palestine at 1099 AD, they were mobilized because of some internal European things. The papacy was in control of Europe, appointing kings and rulers of the different areas of Europe. And they saw that these kings and whatever rulers were fighting each other, and the Pope decided, hey, in order to unify all these fighting European kings, let's get them on this crusade to quote unquote liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims. So they used the religion, but it's not because they were religious. I mean, first of all, the holy sites like the Church of Nativity or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was actually under Christian control here, even at the height of that Islamic power, 1199 AD. So these churches were functioning and doing well, including my own ancestors who were running these churches. So we didn't need liberation, so to speak. Jerusalem actually had more Christians than Muslims in 1199 AD, and Jews, of course. But the Crusaders came here at that time with the excuse of Christianity. Hence, I would say it's the same as comparing Crusaderism with Christianity. The Crusaders came here with the excuse of Christianity, and they used it to kill Muslims, kill Jews, and even kill Christians who happened to be, quote unquote, the wrong type of Christians. The Crusaders were Catholic, and some Christians here were Greek Orthodox, so like my family. So they oppressed them equally. So it was a political idea, but it was couched in religious terminology. And I don't need to explain to you how dangerous that is when it happens, because it is unfortunately happening in India, as some of your leaders use that language. And Mahatma Gandhi was killed precisely because of that, because he warned against this kind of stupidity.
This is one question for Zohar. Since you were brought up in kibbutz, now what is the status of kibbutz in Israel now? Is the institution the same, or is on the decline, or what is its status now? I was asking about the status of kibbutz in Israel.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We had some technical problem. Yes, the kibbutz movement has been declining, but you know, since we're speaking about Zionism and all this, the problem with kibbutzim was that it was originally an anarchist venture that was taken over by the Zionist movement and utilized. And actually, kibbutzim are maybe the biggest group in Israel that benefited from the Nakba, from the dispossession of the Palestinians in 1948, because a lot of their land, the cultivated land, came from there. But kibbutzim are no longer as communal as they used to be, most of them. There is some revival in the fringes, but mostly it's a dying thing.
What can you say about terms like Zionist left? Is there anything like Zionist left in Israel?
I would say no. There is on the political map inside 48, inside the Israel. There's the whole Zionist spectrum, from people who claim to be very concerned about human rights and about equality and civil liberties and whatever, like Meretz and whatever, I don't know. And then the rest of it is shifting to the right from what used to be the Labour Party that has shrank a lot, to the very, very far right, Bennett and his people who represent the settlers. And there is one party, the Joint List, that is considered outside of the, they keep them because this is another way to show the world, oh, we're so democratic, we let the Palestinian citizens of Israel actually have their own party and vote for it and have representatives in the parliament. But then nobody would even consider them to be part of a government. So I think this is more or less what I have to say about this question.
Gaurav has a question in the chat about the museum and what we are doing. I just answered in the chat with a link to the website, Palestine-Nature.org. I'll also send you a link to a short video, about 8 minutes, about our activities. We do welcome visitation and of course, volunteerism. Once things are opened up, you can come visit us if you like. We have international and local volunteers here. As far as our plans are, we actually had our strategic planning last week, the past few days, and we had set up our strategic goals for the coming 5 years. And we have been in operation since opening in 2017. And we started preparing for the opening before that, of course. But there's always new initiatives, new activities, new functions that we are doing, which you can learn about if you follow us on Facebook or if you are on my email list. So I included my email address in the chat. Please send me an email, or you can write your email in the chat room. That way I can have your email and we can follow up. We should probably try to wrap it up unless you guys have other
Well, there's still
questions.
2 hands raised. So.
Yeah, there's 2 hands raised. Who are they? They're lower.
Ashok and Apurva.
Ashok and Apurva. Apurva.
I have asked that question in the chat also. Are there any restrictions about foreigners entering West Bank?
Well, entering the West Bank, if you're already in Israel, is not a problem. They don't really check anybody going in here. But there are restrictions right now of entering Israel, and of course Palestine doesn't control its own borders. All all the border crossings with Jordan, with Egypt, with through the international airport, they're all controlled by Israel.
We actually had a campaign in 2011 because Israel prevents any internationals from coming specifically to visit Palestinians or to volunteer with Palestinians or to even do medical service here, clinics, etc. So we had a campaign where we asked internationals to come and challenge these rules, which are not written at the time, which said that internationals basically cannot come to help Palestinians or work with Palestinians. So we had hundreds of internationals come to the airport in Tel Aviv and specifically say that they are coming to visit Palestinians because, as Zohar said, only in and out for the Palestinian areas is through Israeli points of entry, if you want, because we are in a captive Bantustan ghetto, sort of like South Africa. So we challenged that, and things didn't improve quite a lot after that, and they deported all these people, of course, just like with the Freedom Flotillas for Gaza. But it was an important public relations to show this. You can still come if you say you're a tourist and that you are just touring the Holy Land, and not mention that you are working with any Palestinians, especially people like me who are outspoken and who are not on Israel's best list or something as collaborators. So anyways, we would love to welcome you.
But right now there are restrictions of Israel actually doesn't allow anybody unless they're permanent residents or Israeli citizens, I think, or have the center of their life here.
Apurva, you had something else?
Yeah, I think we are having a lot of discussions about specificities about Israel and Palestine. I think at this point it'll just be important to mention that I think a reason for having a strong international movement is that none of this is sustained solely by Israel, by some kind of power it derives from the air. It's actually supported financially and through a lot of ties by countries all over the world. Of course, US and Europe are very powerful in that, but just to mention that India is actually the biggest buyer of Israeli arms. We buy 50% of all the arms they export alone. And it's a question for us as a country as to why our public money is spent on financing occupation. And also to remember that the reason a very strong question of solidarity emerges from the fact that we are also complicit in many ways in sustaining this. So, and also apart from the military ties, there are a number of other agriculture and technological ties, which all make whatever Israel does possible and legitimize it. So I think we also need to think from that perspective. So it's not just an action. So as much as I think it's going there, and you cannot understand the places, Mazen says, unless you go there, also because it's so complex the way Israel has divided it and fragmented it. But also coming back home, it's really important that we need to understand how we are also complicit in this situation and kind of try to address that from wherever we are in many ways. And that's where the question of Kashmir comes in, which Mazen was mentioning. We have where do the arms go that come to India? Of course, it goes into surveillance of movements and people also having struggles in our own context. So just to bring in that point back to where we are. Thanks.
Okay. Huh? Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is what?
I can do it.
Okay, then Atul wrote a question in the comments in the chat room that where you want to start without coming here, what can you start? So I was I wrote to him that basically you can look at my book, Sharing the Land of Canaan, available on my website, so you don't have to buy it. There's other resources on that same website, which is kumsiya.org, but you can get other sources off of the internet. There are some good documentary films if you like to watch films. There are good books if you like to read books. They are listed on that website, kumsiya.org. There's a section on books to read or documentaries to watch. Are we close to done? Go ahead, Ashok.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one question. That we are told that the situation in Gaza Strip, particularly, is very grave. I mean, in fact, you mentioned that UN had said that by 1920 Gaza would be unlivable. But then, how under such severe conditions the Gazans are able to, survive? What is the strength behind all that? How is it possible with almost 45% unemployment?
Right words to use, Ashok. No, I mean, like any kind of catastrophic situation, I was watching a documentary about the genocide in Rwanda, the Tutsis and whatever. And this is how people survive. No, some of them don't survive. Some of them die. Some of them survive. Some of them help each other. Some of them give up. There's a suicides in Gaza. There are people actually burning themselves because they cannot live, or they're hanging themselves. Like any people, you have people who respond to stress in various ways. Some are in ways that you would want to admire, and some in ways you wish that they didn't do it, like committing suicide or whatever. It's really, really, really bad. I mean, I get very emotional when I get a phone call from, people in Gaza who don't have any source of income, and a guy who we brought here because his son had cancer, and we managed to, he did get an operation, but then he was semi-paralyzed, and he came here to the West Bank for basically rehabilitation at the hospital here. And then he went back to Gaza, but they don't have an income. And I send them a little bit of money every once in a while. But when I talk to him on the phone, he tells me, well, for a whole week, my children only got like bread. That's it. And I don't know what to do. And then he got the COVID-19. His wife got the COVID-19. He can barely speak in the last week. He just is getting a little bit better. Today he sent on Facebook thanking those who supported him. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I don't want to make it look like Palestinians are not heroes. They are not any different than Indians or Americans or Israelis or any other human beings. We have our poor people. We have our rich people. We have our, it's tough.
Right. So, any more questions from the audience?
Johar is going to share with you a website
Yeah.
In the chat room called We Are Not Numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Please try to follow that to understand a little bit more about Gaza. I think they also have some young writers from other places, Palestinians from other places, but it's mostly young people from Gaza who are telling their stories. And I think some of them can answer your question better than we do. How do they survive under these conditions?
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
more questions? What are your concluding remarks for India? For example, most of the people here are Indians among the audience. practically all of them. Now, there are some very important lessons, according to me, that India is slowly approaching the path that Israel took so many years back, and Israel has consolidated on that particular path. India is also slowly is taking that particular path. So there are very important lessons for us from the Palestinian struggle, and we should learn more about Palestine, their struggles. Thank you very much, Mr. Mazin and Zohar, for illuminating us on these aspects. Now, can you say something as a concluding remarks?
Let me, well, Zohar, you go first.
Okay, I go first. And I would say that it was very interesting for me to listen to the last comments by Apurva about, Kashmir and the connection and the fact that, India is complicit and it's becoming very much connected. But I would try to encourage you to look at the challenges that you have as, just people trying to stay human in India, and to try and connect with the struggles, not just the Palestinian struggle, but also the Palestinian struggle, and then find, ways in which to respond to that through direct action or through a boycott, divestment and sanctions. And of course, this is also for your own sake, not just for other people's.
Yes.
That's precisely, Zohar said it well. If we let those guys, there's an American author by the name of Howard Zinn, happens to be Jewish American, by the way, who wrote a book that says you can't be neutral on an open train, on a moving train. And I think Arundhati Roy has similar writings to, you know who she is, right? She's an Indian author that I highly respect. She wrote many books that are pretty remarkable, many writings that are pretty remarkable, that explains why neutrality is not a way to move, because the train is moving. India is being taken in a direction, as you rightly pointed out, Ashok, that is not a direction that's survivable even for India. If India continues in the same slippery slope, they're going to end up with a nuclear war with Pakistan, which neither will survive. So it's really important that whether we are Pakistani or we're Indians or we are Palestinians or whatever, is not let these trends in our own governments, in Israeli government, Palestinian, whatever, to let these politicians basically take us down paths that are not survivable for the species, for Homo sapiens. They think, politicians sometimes think that there's a win-lose scenario, that they can win. Sorry, their children will also be ones who suffer with us, because we are in a place in our history as a species in the 21st century where even my students who do master degree in biotechnology can create a weapon of mass destruction that kills millions and millions of people. Security doesn't come from walls or from strong military or from any of these things. Security comes from justice, from human rights, from respecting the other. This is what we are working on here. And I encourage everybody to really understand how dangerously close we are to not only destroying, the biodiversity on this earth through climate change, but destroying ourselves from climate change, from pandemics, from global nuclear war, all these things that are coming on us with a vengeance if we don't get our act together. And people like Modi and Netanyahu and Donald Trump, they don't care. They don't give a shit. Sorry about my language. They don't care. They don't pay attention to the needs of the people. And we need to, I mean, politicians, they do this. They stick their finger in the air, see where the wind is blowing. And what we have to do as a people is apply a hurricane to get them to, to do the right thing. And, you know, my American friends, I'm a US citizen, by the way, many of them are optimistic about Biden. I tell them, don't be optimistic about Biden. Sorry, Biden will do worse than Trump if you let him. If you let him. If you work and you get your act together, that's how you got your civil rights in the 1960s. That's how you got women's right to vote in the 1920s. That's how you got Social Security. That's how you got 40-hour work weeks. This is all done by people movement. If we don't move as a people, if we stay neutral, these people will be very happy. They're very happy. They do their thing and leave us alone, and they continue to profit, and people continue to die. This is the choice. It's really a pivotal choice we all have to make. That's why I say joint struggle is key.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mazin, and thank you, Zohar. We'll return to you again and again, and I think you will illuminate more and more to us through your presentation.
Who didn't send me their email, please send me their email, and we will put this on YouTube, and hopefully we can reach large audiences from this.
Yes. Mazin, can you share that on Drive so that
I will put it on YouTube and I share the link.
Okay. No problem. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Gaurav, do you want to say something?
Sorry?
Gaurav?
Yes, sir.
What do you want? You want to say something?
No, I was just saying thank you for the very illuminating chat.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Yes. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
मस्त झाले.
You still need the chat, right? Let's just stop recording.